discussing what I think is necessary in understanding the Secret Doctrine, and that is a new mode of thought, awakening a new mode of thought. Can I turn that? Is that all right? That we have to really understand that this is not a book to be read as many other books are simply read. That is to say, you can, of course, go from page 1 to the end of, let us say, volume 1, and that has a certain value, at least to see what is there. But it does not really give you the coherent picture that perhaps reading other kinds of books, other textbooks, for example, will give you. So I think it's important that we consider what is that mode of thought, that it's designed to stimulate and awaken in us a deeper insight, a deeper understanding. And then yesterday, we looked a little bit at the scope and structure, the way in which the books are put together, and something of the sources, simply because I think it's important to realize what is the background of this. That is to say, it's not a PhD thesis that has been presented. It's not an academic work in that sense of a work that has been put together. I think one needs to, of course, be familiar to some extent with, therefore, the way in which it is presented. Volume 1, as we've said, deals with cosmogenesis, Volume 2 with anthropogenesis. So I will be looking this morning a little bit at some of the basis of Volume 1, that is what I call the Cosmogonic Process. Now, as we've already mentioned, and one can very easily, looking at the table of contents, begin to recognize this, one begins to see what HPB has done. Perhaps we should point out that at the very outset she has indicated what the aim of the work is, and this is in her preface. She says the aim of this work may be thus stated: to show that nature is not a fortuitous concourse of atoms. And she has put that in quotations, which indicates that she has taken it, although she doesn't say the source, but she has taken it from someone, and that this was, to a large extent, the mindset of the time in which she was writing, that indeed the universe is simply a happenstance. It came of it's a fortuitous concourse of atoms, which someone has said may be likened to the fact that an explosion in a print factory would have produced the works of Shakespeare. And one can say that this is very much what was the attitude in the last century, that just a kind of explosion in original atomic structure would produce an ordered universe, an ordered system. So to show that that is not true, and to assign to man his rightful place in the scheme of the universe, man becomes central, not in terms of the human, you and I, but rather that it is the pattern, the archetypal pattern of the human. And that pattern is focused at manas, or mind. This is what distinguishes the human. This is the human stage. To rescue from degradation the archaic truths, which are the basis of all religions, we discussed that to a certain extent, and to uncover, to some extent, she says, the fundamental unity from which they all spring. That also we have dealt with. Finally, to show that the occult side of nature has never been approached by the science of modern civilization. So we have her aim very clearly stated there in the preface. She then, as we know, gives a proem in which she sets forth the fundamental propositions, which we've already referred to, and then she bases the whole cosmogonic process on this remarkable work known as the Book of Xian, and gives us 7 stanzas. This is interesting, and we'll look at it a little bit further this morning. She gives 7 stanzas, but indicates that about 11 stanzas are omitted from this early section of the book, which indicates that there is a certain rightness, shall we say, in the number 7, and I think refers to the 7 stages of the cosmogonic process, which we'll look at in just a moment. So she uses these, as it were, as devices. That is, they are sutras on which to build commentaries, which she gives, commentaries that then define more closely what is meant by the sutra or the particular stanza. That constitutes the first part of volume 1, and indeed further stanzas comprise the first part of volume 2. We'll look at that tomorrow. Then she has 2 further parts in each volume. Part 2 of volume 1 deals with the evolution of symbolism, in what she says in its approximate order, that there is an order to symbolism. I think we don't often come back to the table of contents and look at the actual words that she uses in our study. And these several sections, there are 15 sections, deal with then the development of symbolism, but that there is an order to symbolism. Again, it's not just a happenstance. And in its approximate order, she says, so that I think one can read these sections and begin to see that there is a relationship between the various sections. The third part of volume 1 then is focused on science, because science was becoming to be the dominant theme, remember. So that while one of her aims has been to show that in religion, as she has put it, you see, she stated here, that within the to rescue from degradation the archaic truths which are the basis of all religions, her focus really is going to be to speak to the mode of thinking that was becoming dominant at her time. And so the third section, science and the secret doctrine contrasted. And here one may say, well, science has changed so much, we don't need to read this anymore. But that is not true. It's true to a certain extent, and certainly there is a new paradigm in science, which we're very much aware. Physics, for example, has led the way to showing, as we know, that there is indeed what can we call it, an insubstantiality to matter. That, as one scientist has said, the more one studies the atom, the less there's anything to study. That is, anything, because thingness has disappeared. And what we have is a kind of spin, disembodied spin, if you like. So the more one pursues it, the less there is of thingness to examine. But on the other hand, she refers a great deal to a scientist who has had a profound effect on the development of science in this century, and that was Sir William Crookes, who was, of course, a theosophist. But it's an interesting point that she does demolish, of course, with great skill, much of the mechanistic and materialistic science of her time. So today I want to turn then to this whole area of the cosmogonic process and begin to see it in another term, a way of thinking that is coming very much into focus today, and that is what we can call mythological thinking. The importance of myth, and so creation myths and occult cosmogony, and then tomorrow we will look at the myth, a myth in the sense that the whole anthropogenesis, the anthropogonic process, which reflects the cosmogonic, is in a sense myth. Now, what is myth? As I've said, there are many ways we can approach the Secret Doctrine. HPB herself says that one of the modes is parabolical, you remember, or allegorical, which is mythological. So that we can see the Secret Doctrine as revealing those universal principles which govern existence. And we've already mentioned them, I'll just repeat them. These fundamental universal principles. A reality, fundamental, absolute reality underlying all existence, non-material, a non-material reality. The periodic manifestation of that reality in what we can call the spatio-temporal exhibitions, which we call universes and existent beings and so on. A periodical manifestation of it. An appearance of it. It comes forth as an appearance. So from the non-material, which is the, you can say, chaos in its primary sense, not confusion. Chaos we often think of as confusion, but chaos is the container, the primordial absolute reality, which then reflects itself in cosmos, which is its appearance. And as many of you have heard me say, if you look at language, it's very interesting because the word cosmos is indeed the same word we have in cosmetic, which is the appearance, which is beauty, which is the made-up beauty, but it is the orderliness which emerges from chaos. So it's a periodic manifestation, which the Hindus call Maya. That is an appearance, not that it's not there, but it is only the appearance of the ultimate reality. But the third proposition indicates a fundamental identity, therefore, of all existence with its origins, and the consequent necessity of achieving conscious realization. But we can also study the Secret Doctrine, or look at it, as the primary myth of our being. And perhaps because I'm fascinated with mythology, with metaphor, and it's amazing how our language reflects all of this. Our language always does. I would like to focus on that. Again, there isn't time in 5 sessions together in introducing an overview of the Secret Doctrine to explore every single method. So, because I'm doing it, I focus on what I like best, and that is myth. And hope you don't mind. Now, this does not mean that what is given us is not true, but it's true in a deeper sense than the ordinary truth, we can say. But that for our understanding, it's given us in the language of allegory and metaphor, since it concerns consciousness. In the esoteric philosophy, remember, consciousness is primary. It underlies all existence, all appearances. And this is why man becomes central as the archetype. Because in man, consciousness moves. It's that pivotal point where now it becomes self-consciousness. We are self-reflective beings. We can look at ourselves. We can examine our past and future, which squirrels really and rabbits do not do. Whatever the rabbit habit may be, the rabbit is not examining its own past and projecting its own future. But this is the uniqueness of being human. Now, the basic function of myth, according to Joseph Campbell, who was probably, has died since, was probably the greatest authority, scholar in the field of mythology of recent times. Campbell suggested that the basic function of myth is to reconcile consciousness to life. It's an interesting way to put it. To reconcile consciousness to life, that is, to the conditions of our existence. How do we reconcile consciousness to the conditions of our existence? So the functions of myth have four. Myth has four distinguishable aspects, and I've put it on the board. And just as brief background for looking at some of the archetypal motifs and then their reflection in the cosmological or cosmogonical process in the Secret Doctrine, given through these 7 stanzas of Cosmogenesis. First, myth has a function that is religious. That is to say, the myth often invokes in us a sense of awe at what is called the mysterium tremendum, the tremendous mystery of the universe, as well as gratitude for it. The universe is as it is, you know. I always think of Margaret Fuller, the New England transcendentalist, who said, "I accept the universe." And was it Carlyle? I think it was Thomas Carlyle said, "My God, she'd better." Things are as they are, you know, and so one better accept it, as it were. The universe there's a just so-ness. And it's interesting that some scientists today are pointing out that if a fraction more of antimatter had been present than matter after the initial Big Bang, if you subscribe to the Big Bang theory, there would be no universe. They would have wiped each other out because antimatter destroys matter and so on, ends in zero. So that there'd been a fraction more. If the DNA had been slightly different, it would not have produced this form and so on. There's so many things that if the slightest bit had been changed, you know, temperature, for example, is as it is, the ranges of temperature and so on. So there is this religious aspect that invokes the myth invokes awe and gratitude. There is the scientific function of myth in that it reads the cosmic image of the universe and suggests that there is indeed a cosmic image which again is a just so-ness. A quest book that has been to me, a very insightful book, one of the finest ones that has, I think, been written, is the work by Dr. John Hitchcock, Atoms, Snowflakes, and God. Dr. Hitchcock has spoken here at the Crotona School, and he and his wife will be giving a seminar later this year, this fall, in our fall term. But this is an indication that there is a pattern which can be seen. The pattern of the snowflake is hexagonal, the pattern of the hydrogen atom is hexagonal, and indeed the God image, as Carl Jung discovered, is usually hexagonal. There is a pattern. Now, within that pattern there are differences, there are deviations. There's a pattern for the human being. You see, I mean, we all have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, a mouth, but no 2 faces are precisely the same. It's amazing what can be done with this pattern, isn't it? Absolutely incredible as you look around this room what can be done with that pattern. But it's a fundamental pattern. And the eyes are in a certain horizontal field, and there is a certain pattern of a relationship, measurable relationship, between the horizontal field and the vertical field of the ears. There is a relationship. Da Vinci studied this, for example, and in the notebooks of Da Vinci one sees this pattern. There is a very interesting book called The Power of Limits, which shows these patterns that are throughout nature, you see. And so there is a cosmic image. This is the scientific function of myth. There is a sociological function of myth. We won't get into this, but this is that there is a maintenance of a certain social order. And myth provides that function. And the myths of many countries indicate that there is an order, there is a hierarchy, if you like, in nature, and that this needs to be adhered to. And it reflects, it affirms, in fact, that the man-made order is as God-given as the natural order, as it were. And one finds this in many myths. And, of course, there is a psychological function of myth. It carries the individual through the crises in life. And many myths reflect this psychological function and help us to see it. Now, when the Secret Doctrine is considered, I think, as both cosmological and anthropological myth, it's really less frightening in many ways. Because it doesn't say, you see, one doesn't have to worry very much about what may be called the facticity of the Secret Doctrine. Now, that's a nice word, but I like it. It's a word that Dr. Herbert Gunther uses in connection with some Tibetan texts, the facticity. We don't have to worry, did this really happen? And when did it happen? You see, when we get to, for example, anthropogenesis tomorrow, did Atlantis really sink? Was there really such a continent? Were we really pudding bags at some stage, and so on? This is irrelevant, because what is being pointed to is a deeper truth than the facticity, if we can call it that. It's a nice word, isn't it? Is the report of an occurrence really accurate in every detail? And when did it occur, and so on? Now one is concerned with patterns, with archetypes, and their images in the human psyche or consciousness. And so it seems to me that we can begin to realize that there are certain definite archetypal motifs, if you like. And creation myths are really the deepest and most important of all myths. Every culture, every civilization has a creation myth. The myth today is the scientific myth, if you like, of the Big Bang, but that's as much mythological as any other myth, any of the older myths. It just, you know, we can say, oh, but that's science says this and that. It's still a myth. That is to say, it deals with an archetypal pattern. They're concerned, the creation myths are concerned with the ultimate meaning of the existence of the cosmos, which means the ultimate meaning of ourselves. And myths reflect really what we think of ourselves, and they very much shape our worldview. Many of the elements found in the old creation myths seem rather weird and certainly very abstract, quite alien to us who pride ourselves on the development of rational consciousness, the rational side, but that they point to certain archetypal patterns. And so I'd like to look at these in terms also of the Secret Doctrine, if we can. And we can list a number of them. Put it in blue, why not? We have color on the video, so why shouldn't we have color on the board? All creation myths deal with an unknown. A kind of original beginning, a mystery in the true sense. It's fundamental. A kind of, as we've said with regard to reality, which is the first fundamental proposition of the Secret Doctrine, HPB talks of its unknowability. That is, the mind cannot really comprehend it. And yet it is experienceable. And so to get this across, almost all myths begin with a marvelous, there's a kind of formula for them. Once upon a time. You know. And that's any time. Any time. Once upon a time. The great Jewish theologian, Dr. Martin Buber, suggested that it really has to do this in the beginning with, for the sake of a beginning. One has to start somewhere. If I'm going to tell you a story, and we do this with children, you know, we're going to tell a story, we always start in some way with this formula, once upon a time. And the great student of comparative religious studies in our day, Mircea Eliade, said that this is the fundamental formula to get past the fact that there may be no beginning, or that the beginning is always now, once upon a time. It's a sacred time. It's a time which is not clock time. It's not, you know, at 10:25 a.m. this happened, sort of thing. It's any time which is no time. It's mythic time. So it's the unknown. Now, in nearly all creation myths, there is then what can only be called a mirror principle at work. And this is one of the great archetypes. That is, there's a repeatability. Once upon a time, the eternal parents, in fact, the stanzas begin, the eternal parent space, who had slumbered once again, wakes up. So this is repeated at level after level. What happens in the universal mind, for example, is repeated at all subsequent stages. We see this principle, this mirror principle at work in many external rituals. When one lays the foundation of a house, for example, or a building, one is recreating the world. And it becomes then a kind of what should we say, repeatability, and you wouldn't put the foundation stone anywhere else except the northeast corner. This is a repeatability. And why that particular direction in space and so on. The same repetition of creation is found in the establishment of a town or a city. Every town recreates the cosmogonic pattern. And there's always a main street. And notice how many towns and villages and cities in the United States have main streets. You know, somehow Ojai avoided that, and so we have Ojai Avenue, you see. But again and again, where is the main street? And it may be called the main street. And everything is oriented from that center, you see. And towns without a center are very difficult. I won't go into that. In every culture, there's a new year. It may not be, you know, January 1st, which it is in our culture. If you're here in the West, all you have to do is live in India for a little while. And, you know, and all the New Years, the Tamil New Year and the Telugu New Year, and, you know, there's a New Year. Every group, every culture has its own New Year. The Jewish New Year, the New Year of Islam, and so on. These are at different times, aren't they? Usually. But every culture has a beginning for a year. Now, does it matter? Is there much difference between December 31st and January 1st? Really? Is there very much difference? The weather may be the same. There really isn't very much difference, is there? But somehow January may be a holiday, and you may have had to work on December 31st, and you don't work on January 1st. But there really isn't. But for the sake of a beginning, we have a new year. Now, closely associated with this mirror principle, which is the repeatability, that is to say, that it is mirrored again and again, very much connected with that, is another kind of reflection motif. And I separate this because there's a slight difference between the mirror motif and the reflection motif. Sometimes this is seen as a kind of opposition, this reflection motif. Sometimes everything is created first in heaven, and then its replica or image is projected on earth. Mircea Eliade, in his book, The Myth of the Eternal Return, gives a number of instances of this dual motif of where a reflection occurs, and points out that, for example, in the cosmology of the Zarvantic tradition, which is part of the Islamic tradition, every terrestrial phenomenon corresponds to a celestial, transcendent, invisible term. So it's a reflection, not just the mirror repeatability, but a reflection. And among the Navajo and Hopi traditions, there are certain creation myths that suggest that the entire process begins from above, from below, and then is reflected in the sky, slowly moves upward, and perhaps either calls forth what was originally there. So it's a reflection. And creation is always in terms of an awakening. And this almost always, and this of course is very much in the Secret Doctrine. One has it, for example, at the third, well, we have it at the very beginning. The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever-invisible robes, had slumbered once again. Now, the very fact that it says slumbered once again is going to imply what?
She has slumbered.
Not only that she slumbered before, but that she's going to awaken, doesn't it, you see?
Is it like a rebirth?
So it's like a rebirth, yes, very much so. And we have then, in the third stanza, the last vibration of the seventh eternity thrills through infinity. The mother swells, expanding from within without. The vibration sweeps along, and so on. So that there is now an awakening. A real awakening begins to occur. And this awakening, it can be a deliberate awakening, or it can be a kind of awakening by accident. And there are some mythologies that have it very amusingly, almost by accident. There's a great myth in the Winnebago Indian tradition. The Winnebagos were, of course, in our north central states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, through there, the Winnebago Indians. And there's a creation myth in the Winnebago mythology, always been one of my favorite ones, which begins, in the beginning, you see, once upon a time, in the beginning, the earth maker was sitting in space when he came to consciousness, and there was nothing elsewhere. So it's a kind of, he wakes up and there's nothing around, you see. So again, this awakening. And there are many myths where it's a kind of stumbling on to something. The creator stubs his toe and becomes aware that there is something, so he has to do something about it, sort of thing. An emergence from a state of slumber. This indeed we have in the Secret Doctrine. We have the mirror principle, we have the repeatability in the densification of the fields, which are the planes of existence. The reflection principle. Man is the reflection of the Creator, you see. So again and again there is the reflection principle. And in many myths there's the motif of the twin creators. This can be a very interesting one. Not always twins, but paired in some way. And HPV speaks indeed of the duality that then manifests, and that the creative process is really from that duality, however it may. Usually they complement each other. One may be more active, one more passive. One may be masculine, the other feminine. And one gets that very much in the Secret Doctrine. And you can pick out these motifs. One may be light and the other dark or shadowy. One can be clever and the other rather stupid or lazy or sleepy, and so on. One of the North American Indian tribes has a marvelous myth, a delightful story, that creation, which is the story of Coyote and Silver Fox. A silver fox created by thinking, and Coyote went to sleep while all this was going on. And when Silver Fox had finished getting everything created, he wakes up Coyote. And what does Coyote do? The amusing thing is that he begins to eat up everything that Silver Fox has created. And that's very interesting. There's a tremendous truth wrapped in that amusing incident, because in East Indian mythology, not North American, but Indian mythology, it is Kali, for example, or time, that eats up creation, you see. And what do? We assimilate our world, which is the same thing as eating it. And we are all of the time eating our world. We bring everything into conscious realization, that is. A variation on this motif is found in myths that speak of a third, and one gets this, that there is a watcher in the background, as it were, who remains in the sky and does not take part at all in the creative process. Another archetypal motif very much found is what we can call the Deus Faber. That is the worker, the maker, Faber, the creative deity as the creative principle as an artisan or architect who creates the world on the analogy of some skill or craft. And in the Secret Doctrine, for example, in the stanzas, we have the concept of the architect and the builders. And there are numerous builders, you see. There's a whole host of builders. Well, it's necessary if you're going to get a universe as complicated as we seem to have. You've got to have a lot of builders. If it's going to be a simple little structure, a wooden hut, you don't need quite as many builders, perhaps. And sometimes the very list of the builders gets complicated in the Secret Doctrine. We have it in Egyptian mythology, where the god Ta is said to have created the world on a potter's wheel. And another image that is frequently used in the Upanishads is that of weaving or spinning, probably because that was, of course, this is the feminine side of creation. And you get very much this image of spinning, of weaving. You get it very much also in the Secret Doctrine. The reference to the Upanishad where the spinning is by the spider who projects from himself the web of the universe, the whole web, and then swallows the web. But it's from his own being that the web emerges. In one of the earliest commentaries on the Rig Veda, it is said that God wove the earth, which is from primeval matter. And this is the web of the universe, you see. Svabhava. We have many of these terms in the Secret Doctrine. As weaving, of course, is usually associated with feminine activities, this motif is found in those myths which really show the creative principle as feminine, you see. We have the myth of the goddess Nemesis in Plato's Timaeus, where it is said she sits in the center of the cosmos and the axis of the cosmos spins around it in her womb like a spindle. There's a wonderful verse in the Rig Veda, even as a smith, the Lord of prayer together forged this universe. In the earliest ages of the gods, from what was not, arose what is. So the picture of the smith forging the universe. And elsewhere in the Rig Veda, the creative principle is spoken of as a carpenter. And it's rather interesting. Mythologically, why was Jesus the son of a carpenter? You see, because he is the son of that creative principle, which we all are, and we build. And in the light of Asia, the concept of many a house has been built, which has held me, and so on. So that this is interesting. In some myths, the work is too hasty or it's incomplete, and so creation sometimes presents problems. There's a marvelous Islamic text about the creation of Adam, in which it is said that when Adam was created, he lay around for 80 years as a simple clump of clay. The creative principle put together this clump of clay, which lay there for 80 years. Then Allah gives him human shape, but a soul is still lacking. So he lies around for another 120 years. These numbers are rather interesting in terms of that particular cosmology. And then Allah breathes a breath of life into the human shape, but it doesn't quite fill it. And so Adam wanted to stand up. He wasn't able to do so, so he falls down again. And this is interesting in terms of the growth, you see. For example, the early developmental stage, which is called the first root race, is merely the pattern, a kind of lump of clay, which is simply the pattern, no life in it. But then it's shaped in the second. It's only in the third that there begins to come some life energy, but it's not able yet to stand up. These are mythological themes, really. One can begin to see them. And so it's only later that he's able to stand up with the infusion of manas, if you want. And so the Quran has it, man was created in a hasty manner. And HPB in one place tells us that man was not created this complete being he now is. No, indeed not. So we have these reflections in what HPB is telling us. It's mentioned in a text of the Midrash, one of my favorite stories. But I think I'm going to quit at this point and leave that story for after the break.